1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, you're listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. We are a general interest independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. This year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to close our store and cancel in-person events. But Skylight is your neighborhood bookstore, and we are finding ways to create community even while we're far apart. In the coming weeks, we'll be putting out lots of new audio content to help you discover new books, connect with authors, and check in with your favorite booksellers. To learn more about how you can help keep Skylight alive, please visit our website at skylightbooks.com or check out our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
Hello, lovely audience, listeners, viewers, people in cyberspace. Welcome to the virtual Skylight Books. We're here tonight to celebrate a new anthology, Speculative Los Angeles. We have the editor, Denise Hamilton, and contributors Alex Espinoza and Amy Bender here with us today. You'll see them down there as a little picture-in-picture. We're so glad you could join us here on Crowdcast. This is our new temporary home during the pandemic. If you haven't joined one of our Crowdcast events before, let me give you a quick tour. My name's Maddie. I'll be your guide this evening. I'll be your host, your MC. So Crowdcast, it's a lot like Zoom webinar. You're going to be able to see and hear us, but you won't have your own audio or video. The best way to communicate with us during the event is via the chat on the right side of your screen. You can also ask any questions that you have for our readers tonight using the Ask a Question feature down at the bottom of your screen there. That'll collect the questions in a nice tidy queue for me so they don't get lost in the chat. We also have a nice shiny green button here that says Order Event Books. So if you click that button, it's going to take you right over to the Skylight Books website. Skylight Books, we are an independent bookstore located in Los Angeles, conveniently enough to you. Wherever you are, we will send you books. And we are open right now for in-store shopping 11 a.m. to 7 p.m. weekdays and 10 a.m. to 8 p.m. Weekends. All right, so one more thing I want to point out is the donate button. If you want to support our events programming directly, you can do so there. We really appreciate all of you showing up for us in this time. It's rough out there, and you got to build the community you want to see. That's where we're at in the 2020s. So thank you for continuing to show up for us and for authors, and especially for local authors writing about LA. We're really excited about this new anthology. One more thing I should say is if you like our events, you can follow our Crowdcast page and you'll get updates about all of our new ones. We've got a great schedule coming up in March. Tomorrow we have a fantastic comics event with Jason Liu, Chip Zdarsky, and they're going to be in conversation with Paul F. Tompkins about their new comic Afterlift. I'm really stoked about that one. Should be a good time. So we hope to see you there as well. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest today. All right. Edgar Award finalist Denise Hamilton is the author of 7 crime novels and the editor of the best-selling anthology Los Angeles Noir, which includes the Edgar Award-winning short story The Golden Gopher by Susan Straight, who's also a friend of Skylight. She's also the editor of Los Angeles Noir 2, The Classics. She is a former Los Angeles Times journalist, a Fulbright scholar, a noir and sci-fi fantasy geek, and a proud LA native who refuses to speak only in English. She is the editor of Speculative Los Angeles. All right, next up, we have Alex Espinoza. Alex Espinoza was born in Tijuana, Mexico, to parents from the state of Michoacan and raised in suburban Los Angeles. In high school and afterwards, he worked a series of retail jobs, selling everything from eggs and milk to used appliances, custom furniture, rock t-shirts, and body jewelry. Wow, so many lives. After graduating from the University of California, Riverside, he went on to earn an MFA from UC Irvine's program in writing. His first novel, Stillwater Saints, was published by Random House in 2007 and was named a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writers Selection. The book was released simultaneously in Spanish under the title Los Santos de Agua Mansa, California, translated by Liliana Valenzuela. His second novel, The Five Acts of Diego Leon, was also published by Random House in March 2013. His newest book is Cruising: An Intimate History of a Radical Pastime, which was published by the Unnamed Press in June of 2019. Alex is the Tomas Rivera Endowed Chair of Creative Writing at UC Riverside. All right, and last but certainly not least, we have Amy Bender. Amy Bender is the author of 6 books: The Girl in the Flammable Skirt, which was a New York Times notable book, An Invisible Sign of My Own, which was an LA Times Pick of the Year, Willful Creatures, which was nominated by The Believer as one of the best books of the year, The Particular Sadness of Lemon Cake, which is just one of my favorite titles ever, which won the SCIBA Award for Best Fiction and an Alex Award, The Color Master, a New York Times notable book for 2013, and her latest novel, The Butterfly Lampshade, which came out in July 2020. We still have signed copies of this, by the way, if you want to order one. It was longlisted for the Penn Jean Stein Award. Her books have been translated into 16 languages. Her short fiction has been published in Granta, GQ, Harper's, Tin House, McSweeney's, The Paris Review, and more, as well as heard on PRI's This American Life and selected shorts. She lives in Los Angeles with her family and teaches creative writing at USC. Denise, Alex, and Amy, welcome to the program. So glad to have you here. This is not a program, but I'm glad to have you. We bring you up here.
Yay! We appreciate Skylight very much. So I edited 2 volumes of Los Angeles Noir, and then I was thinking, okay, what else can I do with Akashic? And so I've always been interested in dark fantasy and sci-fi. And I thought maybe I should propose an anthology of that. But then I thought, well, someone's done it before, right? Because this is LA. This is the capital of fantasy land and artifice and unreality. But I looked around and no one had. So Akashic liked the idea. And so here we are. I just, came up with 14 writers who's writing about Los Angeles I love. And Amy, I guess I'll start with you by asking, speculative fiction is a genre that you live in and swim in. Most of your work is in that realm. I don't know if you would call it speculative or you have, what term do you use for?
Did you say for me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. Yeah. Well, I mean, I like speculative. I think it's one of the more encompassing words of the options, So I've heard a lot of them. Fabulism is good too, but speculative is larger. So, yeah.
Well, and so I'm very curious. What the only thing I did, I told the different authors was pick a neighborhood or a monument or something in LA, a physical place that strikes you or haunts you, and write about that. And so why did you pick the tar pits? And maybe explain a little bit about the tar pits first for people who are not from LA and have no idea what this means.
Sure. And thank you. It's such a pleasure to be in the book, and this, I love the stories in it, and to be in there with your story and Alex's story. It's just, I'm really pleased. So thank you. And it was really fun when you sent the email and you said, pick a neighborhood, because I, about 8 years ago, moved right near the tar pits and had twins, and then would take them on a walk through, like, daily during their nap with the stroller through, it's called Hancock Park. It's not the sort of bigger fancy Hancock Park with the houses, but it's literally that little park with the Tar Pits Museum, and LACMA has a bust of John Hancock, who, like, is different, I think, than the signature one.
Did you always find the tar pits to be kind of eerie? Because I certainly did as a kid. There was something otherworldly about them, like a portal into the far past.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think I would walk by them every day, and it was so interesting to just be exposed to them again and again, because I saw them as a child. I grew up in LA, and I remember doing, like, field trips to the tar pits, because they really are a portal to the past completely, and pulling up the tar and the heavy one and the less heavy one. But I also felt really taken by the sculpture choice, which is what I ended up writing about, because it's such, and I think I had felt it before, but even just to walk by it daily and feel like, what a traumatic choice to have this drowning woolly mammoth as, like, the illustration of what the tar was like for animals. So I just would think about it repeatedly. And I also just felt like I spent a lot of time just kind of in the milieu of that park. And so it was really fun to kind of get to spend some time thinking about it and dig into the history a little bit about who sculpted it and try to find info on him, which was very hard to find. So I enjoyed that a lot.
The tar pits also, they're creepy because they literally are bubbling pools of tar that animals used to drown in, because after a rain there would be a film of water over it, so it just looked like a watering hole. And the ancient woolly mammoths and rhinos and saber-toothed cats and everything would go and drink, and then they would get caught in the tar and they would sink and die and struggle. And I think they found some human remains in there as well. And so now, of course, it's all fenced off so that nobody can get in. But the little girl in your story is very interested in those tar pits and in the giant fiberglass representations, sculptures of the animals that are struggling in the tar. And the animal, it's an elephant, it's a woolly mammoth family, and the family starts moving around and shifting, and some of them disappear, and one of them shows up in another part of town. And there's like whispers in the grass of the park, and there's just a very eerie feeling to it. And yet the little girl seems to not find it odd at all. I mean, it seems like, the logic, adult logic and child logic are completely different things. And one is kind of a dream state that is very speculative, because they haven't learned to live in reality yet. I mean, is that something that you were trying to explore?
That maybe they haven't learned to live in reality, or they haven't tested over reality with a certain sort of, adult lens.
Right. They haven't been like tortured into like, there's only one reality and you have to live in it.
And I think there is something, just as you're saying, about walking by this tar and knowing it's been there for millennia and that it's the same tar, and that really to imagine that there were these woolly mammoths walking around these same grounds. Like already we're in speculative land. That's so incredible. And it's actually true. It's just, I don't know of any other city that has a tar pit as like a tourist destination. It's just so odd and so wonderful, I think. So, but I guess I wanted to think about, I felt like when I really thought about this sculpture and the artist who had put it together, it was so much about grief to have, you have one parent, watching the other parent in the tar, and they can't rescue them because they'll die. And then you have a child watching, and that for this child, something about it was actually truthful to her experience because she has a mother who's gone. And so it felt comforting in the way that art is comforting when it reflects something true. But I guess I wanted to have her be the outlier because I think I'm just fascinated by the fact that we walk by it over and over again, and it is so upsetting. Like it's a really upsetting joy. So it's not just the tar pits; it's how the tar pits were made sort of iconic that I think is interesting. And it was just really fun to spend time with that. Like I said, I appreciate it.
And you have the uncle too, right?
Right, the uncle's across trumpeting. Right,
the woolly mammoth uncle we're talking about, not a human uncle.
Across the
He's
giant.
way over there.
And it's all fenced, of course, because it has to be, because people can't go in there. And if we unfenced it, people would, and it would be horrible.
And they would die. They would get stuck in the tar and they would scream. And then their friends would try to come rescue them and they would die. And I'm surprised people don't climb the fence to get over there when they're drunk and throw themselves into it. But what you said about that it's this weird, eerie, creepy place in the middle of the city, right next to this gigantic boulevard that sees hundreds of thousands of people pass it every day. And it seems to belong to a very different reality than the rest of the urban landscape of LA.
And that the same tar gets poured into asphalt to make roads. So it's like you have the road, you just have side by side different eras of existence on the planet. And I think that's really wonderful. Like I really love that about it. I love the weirdness of it. And I love the reminder that we're just a phase of, whatever is next.
Well, I think you did that really well. And then also looping around the creator of these gigantic fiberglass sculptures, having a message for the daughter, and also it was so ironic that, of course, he had a connection to Hollywood. He was a set designer for Hollywood,
yeah,
right?
Yeah. Yes.
Which is
I mean, it's like if you look on the plaques, which then I could go by, when writing the story, and his name was Howard Ball, and he made these fiberglass woolly mammoths, and he was, like a that special effects, sort of lived in Torrance was his studio. And so, but there was very little about what he was working on and stuff, but and they have a photo of him sort of bringing woolly mammoth on this truck bed,
that's LA. You're driving down the street and here's a woolly mammoth, a gigantic, 20-foot woolly mammoth cruising past you on the freeway.
And just imagine, when he pitched it to be like, well, I'm going to have 4, and one's across the lake and one's here, and then there's one, they're all helpless. It just feels like, how did that pass the meeting? They were like, that sounds great, Howard.
The horror. LA is just this crazy place with many layers of reality and unreality. And Alex, you decided to go with a 21st century myth, or changeling, the story, the ancient kind of changeling myth. Tell us what inspired you to choose that topic and set it in the present the way you did.
Well, first of all, thank you, Denise, and it's wonderful to be here with you, Amy. Amy, I've known you for many years, and I've always been a big fan of your work. And I never thought that I would be in an anthology with you, so it's really cool. And I also want to thank Johnny Temple and Akashic Books for their creativity and their bold sort of vision, and not just this series, but the noir series. And it's really great to be in this company. I'm really touched by it and thrilled. I the funny thing is I think Amy, you said the title speculative is kind of a broad, a broad title, and it is, and I never thought about that. And I don't know, I've always sort of dabbled in that sort of area, right? And have always been fascinated. And some of my favorite writers are, writers who sort of bend reality, right? Who sort of do these amazing things. So it's always something that had sort of had tugged at me. I moved back to LA after spending over a decade in the Central Valley in Fresno, and came back to LA and, bought a house here in El Sereno and started a new job. And the LA that I remembered as a kid had totally changed, right? It had become something completely different. And I was fascinated by that. I was fascinated by the fact that I was living in a neighborhood that once upon a time, was not considered a very safe neighborhood. You don't go to El Sereno, and suddenly there I was. And I was listening to a lot of lore, a lot of that podcast, the sort of the Aaron Mahnke's lore, and he would talk about changelings and, all these spinning all these myths. So I spent a lot of time just listening to podcasts. And then when we started talking, I thought, well, I was listening to and watching all of these news reports of these caravans of migrants, coming, and this was at the height of the previous administration, which shall not be named, and their very harsh take, right? And there were stories about parents being reunited with their kids, and the kids, acting differently or exhibiting symptoms, or just not being themselves. And I just started sort of meditating on the idea of what that separation at that time would do to a child, how scarred they would be. And that's kind of what I went with, so I sort of had all these pieces, and I thought, well, let me sort of write something about, a woman who is convinced that her child, after, they meet up again, is not the same. And so that's kind of how it started. And I sort of wanted to explore that. I think that bond between a mother and her child, and the way in which a mother knows, their kids, knows their children, no matter what. And that's kind of how the story evolved. that's how it sort of happened.
It was so haunting. And I've talked to people who said, I cried as I read that story. I cried all the way through because, yeah, it's like a mother knows her own child, doesn't she?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't she?
Or does she? Right.
Or does she? And, the theater of cruelty, the separation of a toddler who can barely speak in any language from the only parent, from their mother. There's just nothing more awful and hideous. And we don't know how long the child has been separated, but the child has been in detention in some kind of a camp or facility. And now the child is returned to the mom, and the child is withdrawn, barely speaks, has low affect, all things that one might expect from a traumatized child, or at the very worst, a child who's been abused and neglected. And so you managed to do this incredible hat trick of taking this very ancient idea of the changeling and throwing it into the headlines. But I guess I felt some of your, I felt like bubbling underneath the surface was like your own cry of pain and your howl of like, this is wrong, this is cruel, this is what happens, we can't have a society like this. And it was, I thought it was even more powerful that it was, you made it like dystopia sci-fi than if it had been real, because we've been reading all the real stories in the newspaper that are so awful, but you transmuted it somehow and turned it into something that was completely different, that like transcended the headlines.
Well, I think that's what I like so much about the genre of speculative or science fiction, is the way in which it sort of allows, and Amy, I mean, you've written this a lot. We have a lot more experience in this sort of genre than I do, so correct me if I'm wrong. But the way in which it sort of allows an opportunity for writers to sort of almost like hyper emphasize some of the issues that are prevalent that we're dealing with right now. Like Octavia Butler did that, in Parable of the Sower, and in like just the ways in which, writers are able to sort of take something that's happening and just really exaggerate it to the nth degree, right? I think by taking it and making it sort of giving it a science fiction bend or a speculative bend, I think you can say bigger truths about it than if it were something that were, legitimate, straight up literary, like realist fiction or whatever. So I think that's what was sort of so appealing to me about it was, the idea again of like this, these like the thought of like who are these people when we meet up with them again, right? I remember my mother saying that when my father, was working in here in the US back in the 60s. He was undocumented. He was working in a lot of the factories in Chicago. And, my father picked up really bad habits when he was here because he was away from his family. He started drinking a lot, and so by the time my mother met up with him, my mother said, like, he was a different man. Like, he was a different man than the man that left. And that always sort of stuck with me, and I thought, damn, like the things that sort of families have to go through in order to sort of, just provide, for themselves so that they live. But what that sort of, that rupture creates, right? It creates these I think these issues and scars that ripple over time, right? In the same way that, the tar does, and the bubbling, and, these echoes that sort of, get traced throughout, and suddenly you have past and present sort of existing right next to each other in very strange and incongruous ways, right? So,
do you think LA, do either of you, do you think LA lends itself to speculative fiction more than other cities? Hollywood and, the edge of the continent, and so many different cultures with their own mythologies.
What do you think, Amy?
I mean, well, I wanted to just say, hold on 1 second.
You can say something completely different. Amy.
Okay, I just wanted to respond to something that Alex was saying that I thought was so powerful in his story. There's like a little nod to and like you were saying, Denise, with the theater of the journalist sort of being like, here's the reunion and this moment like that. I certainly watched, the clips of the kids being reunited with their parents and being both horrified and moved. And I think it's such a meaningful leap in terms of what fiction can do. If it's not an investigative journalistic piece, then to allow that time to be with the mother's point of view and feel like what happens next when everybody leaves and this trauma has happened and you have the core players together. And I just felt glad for you to take that time with that. It just felt, painful and helpful to think about it with you in the story, I thought that was really, and then to have that move towards the speculative sort of deepens our sense of her emotional alienation too, and the child's. So I just thought it worked really well.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, it was really powerful to read. And yeah, I mean, I would say LA, I mean, it's hard to know because of course, like LA is the city I know best, but it also like the thing I've always thought about LA is that there's just a lot of daydreaming space because when we are driving more, there's a lot of car time. I've been driving very little this year, but like, it just feels like part of the isolation of LA also allows for a certain amount of that kind of speculative room to just make stuff up. Finding people takes a little more effort than what I imagine, in New York, you're just sort of bumping into people. So it has a kind of, there's a more sort of head-on person-to-person contact. And in that way, I feel like LA and its weirdness and its, every street has 7 different architecture types. Like that sort of LA spirit is also playful and eerie, both. So I think it does lend itself to space outside of whatever one might call realism.
Yeah. And I think, just to sort of pick up on that, you mentioned all the different architectures, Amy, and the first thing I thought about was one of my favorite novels. It's A Day of the Locust by Nathaniel West, when he's describing all the different sort of, the houses with moats and then one that looks like a Polynesian hut and the sort of the sort of collision of all of these different histories. And I think, like people like Mike Davis have written about like how, LA basically shouldn't be, right? Like it's a landscape that sort of is artificially constructed and created. And then you have the tectonic plates bumping up against each other, and you have all of this fissure and things bubbling up and cracking and breaking. I think in a lot of ways it does lend itself. I mean, we're on the Pacific Rim, we're on the Ring of Fire, right? We exist in an environment that is incredibly volatile and always changing, always shifting and morphing into something else. And I think that unsteadiness, I think, creates a sort of a cauldron, I think, of these kinds of ways of thinking. It's very sort of, punk rock, as we say in Mexico, punk rock, right? It's just very, it's this, I've traveled to Mexico City, and there's a lot of Mexico City that reminds me of LA. We're very sort of steeped in that pre-Columbian myth. And I think in a lot of ways that other parts of this country aren't, right? They're a lot more sort of Eurocentric. But we have a lot of New World, we have like jaguars and Aztec gods and coyotes coming down, the canyons. And, I've been going on a lot of walks, and like my neighborhood, like I'm getting to know my neighborhood differently because of the pandemic, and I'm not driving as much. And suddenly I'm encountering coyotes, like they come out, they look at me, and there's something almost, dare I say, like magical about that, right? Something weird, like this moment when you realize, like, I'm not the only person occupying this space. I'm not the only living thing or organism that's sort of existing here. There's some wildlife here that's existed long before I have, and they're going to be here long after I am. Right. So I think you only see that in LA. And one of the things I love about our city is that it isn't until you live here, and if you're from here, that you understand it, right? Like I've had conversations with people, they're like, LA, there's just this visceral reaction. And I just think, one, that's stupid, and two, like, it's kind of a badge of honor that we live here. Like, I see it as it's my shit. Like, I live in LA, I can survive it. And I think those of us that come here are cut from a very unique cloth. And I think that's what makes it so wonderful to write, speculative or otherwise.
All right, see, that's why I had you write a story for me, because of all that.
Oh, so great. But it's like you said, Denise, though, too, that it's surprising it hasn't existed before, and it seems like such a natural fit. So a
collection like this. Yeah. We could also do like a classic speculative fiction, because there's a lot of classic sci-fi and fantasy writers who did live here, like Octavia Butler and Brad, of course, yeah, and Harlan Ellison, who wrote wonderfully, not always about LA, but of course, Blade Runner type stuff, But anyway, are there any questions? We have people here. Is there anyone who'd like to ask a question? If so, you could type it into the Ask a Question button. We'd be happy to answer it. If you have questions about the writing process for any of us, or inspiration.
Nice.
No questions yet. Okay.
Will you just talk a little bit about how you made that leap into thinking about speculative for Los Angeles? Just a little more.
I see LA as completely magical and unreal. And I just feel that I drift between what's real and what I'm imagining and what I see and what I think I see. And sometimes I think I see crazy, weird, magical stuff. And then I look again and it's just like some weird truck with the flatbed up or something. And I thought it was some kind of crazy creature, or I see what looks like, or I hear, I've been hiking and I hear what sound like mountain lions growling at me. And I'm way up on the, like in Calabasas or somewhere, or up in the Verdugos. So for me, it's just like, my daily life is filled with, kind of surreal and apocalyptic stuff. I also think that being in LA, we live at the edge of we live inside an apocalypse. I mean, if there's no water here, so we're immediately, bam, into dystopia within 3 weeks if the California aqueduct collapses. And have you ever been down to San Pedro, and seen where the earthquake hit, and there's those like sidewalks and pieces of houses that are like dangling halfway down the cliff?
No.
You guys got to go there. Point Furman in San Pedro, and it's like it's like the crumbling cliffs, and the earthquake of 1931. I guess I don't know if Long Beach was the epicenter or what, but you drive by and you see like, buildings that have been torn down and just decay, and then you see things built back up again. I think the tar pits certainly are something that seem very surreal to me. Yeah. Places that seem like, I don't know, portals into a different LA. And, I love the mix of all the cultures too, and how the different myths from, El Salvador and Myanmar and, Ukraine kind of come here and coalesce and reimagine themselves. And we're all kind of swimming in all of this. And I love that. Did you guys want to talk any more about your stories, or did you want to read a few paragraphs? Or?
Sure. I just want to say that before you read, Amy, I just wanted to say that the thought of the image of the mammoth family, like how incredibly painful that is. Like I was reading your story and I found myself getting emotional over some fiberglass woolly mammoths. Like that's, just the poignancy of it, and the way in which I think that location sort of captures a moment in time, almost like capturing it in amber, right? Is I never thought of it that way. So I love that there are stories in this anthology that sort of force me and make me look at the city in different ways that I never imagined. So I thought that was really powerful.
Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you.
Now you have to read.
All right, I'll read that exact part. I'm just going to read like one page, but just that sort of establishes this part. It's a father and a daughter, but for those who have not seen this place, it's a real tar pit from the beginning of time, or at least 55,000 years back. And this particular lake is left over from asphalt mining of the late 1800s used to patch roofs and roads. The very roads cars were driving by on every day, maybe even Wilshire itself, right next to this exhibit. You can see bubbling tar in it on a daily basis from an underground oil field. No one is allowed in. Inside the pit is the statue of what Anna and I had gleaned to be the mother mammoth, halfway submerged in the tar, and she is trumpeting in terror, her tusks huge and useless. To the side on the banks are the small child mammoth and the larger father mammoth, but they're just watching at the edge. They can't possibly rescue her. The tar has a thick and deadly pull, and once in, a creature cannot get out, which is one reason why there are so many fossils. Far across the tar lake, there's another adult mammoth also trumpeting, and Anna and I call that one Uncle. Anyway, due to her own circumstances, Anna seemed to understand earlier than other children or even other adults how it was tragic, how it was an image of such terrible helplessness and loss, that I often wondered how the sculptor had convinced the Tar Pit Art Association or the museum board or whoever had it put up there 50 years ago to include it as the central image of the park. Had they realized what they were paying for? There's a photo of him on one of the plaques, Howard Ball, the artist himself, driving the first giant 13-foot tall fiberglass beast through the streets of LA on a flatbed attached to his VW Beetle. There's no hint of who's coming next and what the mammoth will be seeing for the rest of his sculptural life. Ball was a Hollywood special effects designer. I can't find much more about him. I've definitely looked at Anna's urging. So that covers some of what we talked about too, but more of the story.
Alex, you going to read a little bit?
Sure, I'll read a section. Let's see. This is a section. This is where Mercedes, who's the mother in my story, and her son have been reunited, and she's convinced that he's not right. He's been acting very strangely, and she goes to do a little research, and then she talks a little bit about the myth of the duende, which is like a changeling in her culture. We walked to the library up on Huntington Boulevard, and there we gathered a stack of picture books, and I asked Ariel to sit by me and look at them as I turned the computer on. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for, but there had to be something to explain all these odd things. It took a while, but slowly, certain similarities began emerging. A mother in Texas reported that her daughter had grown very depressed and moody ever since she'd been returned to her. The girl refused to go outside and spent all day in her bedroom, the curtains drawn. She turned very pale and her hair started to fall out in clumps. Another woman reported that her son had become increasingly violent, harming himself and others. He had beaten up a classmate and pushed him down a flight of stairs. Another mother from Arizona was so sure her daughter had been replaced by a robot that she began cutting the little girl's arms and legs to see if she bled. The little girl nearly died before the mother was arrested and her daughter placed in a foster home. All of these children had been separated from their parents after crossing the border, just like me and Ariel. None of it made sense. I watched him flipping through a book of dinosaurs. He was so unfamiliar to me now, so distant and far away, and no matter what I did, I couldn't break through to him. I remember my mother and grandmother telling us stories about duendes, small creatures that live in the forests and caves around the village. They'd roam the countryside at night and steal laundry and food, vandalize the barns, and rouse the chickens and roosters. I saw one once, my grandmother told me, when I was a girl. It was a little thing. It looked like a child scurrying a few feet ahead of me as I was coming back from the Rio one evening. In the moonlight, I could see that it walked funny, and as I approached, it turned to look at me, Its eyes glowed bright green, and when it grinned, I saw a set of sharp yellow teeth. It had long fingernails, and its skin was covered in hair. The truly sinister ones, though, did more things. They did awful things, they told me. They butchered animals for food. They skinned their hides to wear. They disguised themselves and walked into houses, caused mischief. Some even reportedly lit a woman's house on fire as she slept. They'd steal babies and children, replacing them with lookalikes in order to trick the parents and cause more mischief. And when I asked why they did this, my grandmother sighed and shook her head. They're just bad, my mother replied. They only do it because they're evil. There's no other reason. They're bitter and foul things with hate in their soul. Maybe politicians are duendes disguised as people. I don't know who this child is, but he is not mine. I'm not crazy. Even after all I've been through, I've remained fully intact and fully aware of myself. I am of sound mind, as the Americans say. I look at this boy now, this mysterious life next to me sleeping, and he is not mine. Thank you.
Wow, so powerful.
It really is.
So powerful. Well, yeah.
Yeah, really.
I think both of you managed to like walk this razor's edge where you write beautifully and poetically about reality in real life, and yet there's you guys are writing on two different levels. You know, there's the reality, and then there's the flip side, the unreality, like you just mentioned, Alex, that whole passage you read, and Amy, you too. And the little girl seems to totally process that alternate reality without questioning it at all. But I think that both of you wrote these amazing stories that managed to conjure up this whole alternate Los Angeles and these characters that are very moving. And the stories are speculative, and yet they're also grounded in reality. And I think they say that with science fiction, that people are writing stories that reflect today's concerns, even though they could be, set on Mars, 2 million years into the future. And and I think, both of you wrote about children, troubled children, children in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and what's funny is Amy's is a father and mine is a mother.
I know, I thought of that too.
We're like swapped. Like,
well, you want to mix it up a little.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So.
I think we did get a question.
All right.
Yeah, there is a question.
Yes, it's from me. Do you mind if I ask it?
Oh, yeah.
So this is for everybody, and I'm a somewhat recent Angelina, so I love to collect these recommendations from people. But the first part is, what do you think is the most magical or transportive place in Los Angeles? And the second part is, what place do you think is the most haunted, the spookiest, the most cursed?
Ooh. I think I have some.
Good, go.
Okay. So the first part is I would have to say that for me, the most magical or transportative place in LA is it would have to be Olvera Street.
Nice.
Only because it was sort of artificially created, right, by this woman who was like a booster for the city, and she wanted to do something like for the Mexican population. So it's like this totally, completely artificially created tourist destination that then has become like a sort of attraction, right? Which is, it's very strange. Like there's actually like old adobe houses there, but then you can get like, velvet paintings of Jesus and like maracas and all kinds of crazy stuff. So Olvera Street for me is the most transformative. It's like Los Angeles's version of Mexico, which I totally dig. Like I think it's this very strange inverted version. Like I know, like when I was a kid, I remember knowing like this isn't actually Mexico. It's LA's version of Mexico, but I love it anyway. So I love that about it, right? Like
it's weird because it started out as artifice. And then it became its own animate life. It became more than artifice. It changed.
Yeah, it's kind of like what's happening, and you're seeing like that same thing happen with like the Grove, right? Which like emulates a downtown, like it emulates like streets, and then it sort of just becomes its own thing, which is fascinating. It just sort of grafts on. And I think the haunted and most spookiest place, and this is only because this is in my head because I've been watching it, is, and I'm fascinated with, is the Cecil Hotel in downtown LA.
That's a little portal to hell.
Yeah, that documentary on Netflix right now is really fascinating and disturbing. So I'd have to say that the most haunted and spookiest or cursed place for me in LA is the Cecil.
What about you, Amy?
Well, I think what was coming to mind when we were talking about
are we hearing Amy kind of? Yeah, I'm hearing Amy's audio is breaking up.
Oh,
your chat.
I think frozen now. Yeah, I think her Wi-Fi has gone out.
All right. Then I'll just say I agree with you.
There you are. Oh, there she is.
Is it okay? Is it better?
Yep.
I don't know what happened.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. It's a moment. That I've talked, I think in terms of magical, that one of my favorite places remains the Museum of Jurassic Technology. And I think which is on Venice Boulevard and put together by visual artist David Wilson. And it's very interesting because it's a lot of what we're talking about with the speculative world is that there's a book about it, which is a good book, Mr. Wilson's Cabinet of Wonders by Lawrence Weschler. But the book really leans heavy on this idea of what's real in the museum and what's not real. And so I think there's a weird pressure to go in there and be like, is this bat made up or is this bat real? Is this Russian dog, did this Russian dog really go to outer space or did it not go outer space? But I think it's the wrong entry point, because I think it's about going into a space where you're sort of in someone's imagination and you're sort of in someone's factual knowledge. And there's a room in there of like Airstream trailers, and it's like trailer parks throughout, I think, the West Coast, or maybe it's throughout the whole country. It's just one of the most peaceful places in the city. It's a little dark and there's just these pinpoints of light. And then there are these little dioramas of trailers and little trailer parks, and they're just with trees and little lights on the trees. I just love it. I can't go right now, but I miss it. I like to just go visit that room. And in terms of spooky places, well, now I don't know the documentary you're talking about, Alex, but I recently went to the old zoo, which I think is actually fascinating spooky. It's sort of cool spooky, but it was disturbing somehow. Like the old zoo in Griffith Park, where you can go and like wander around the tiny cages and you can sort of climb in them. It's kind of disturbing and fun.
For me, the most magical place is the last existing Tongva sacred spring in LA, which is in West LA, which is actually on the campus of University High School, right off Barrington. Have you guys ever been there?
No,
it's rarely open. It used to be open every first Saturday of the month, but you can Google it, Gabrielino Sacred Springs, and first of all, from the street, it just looks like an empty field with like weird storage spaces on it. But when you go through the gates, you go further and further in, and it gets lush and filled with reeds, and you can hear bubbling water that's actually coming up from the ground. And there's this ancient cypress tree that was supposedly planted by the Spanish when they were coming up, so that it would give shade. And it was, of course, next to the springs. And there was a village there at one point. And of course, sadly, all that is no more. But you can sit there and, the sound of traffic recedes and you're surrounded by greenery and the bubbling of water. And it's very transportive. You just feel that you could imagine what it was like 250 years ago. And that haunts me quite a bit. All these places in LA that were Native American villages that are, just no longer. And even, the Indians who from the areas were at one point and still somewhat known as like the Gabrielino Indians. And it was like so sad to me that it's like, wait, but what was their name? Not the name the Spanish Padres gave them. And so I feel that those ghosts everywhere in LA, not in a bad way, but
yeah.
I think that's what's so great though. And again, going back to Amy's story, is this idea of like there are these like pockets, these dare we say portals, right? Of where almost like where that are suspended in time, right? Where you can step in and out, and suddenly you're in a different era, right? That I think our landscape is not tied to a specific time, right? It's all sort of past and present, here, now, then, there, like it's all sort of blended together. Like we were, I'm here in El Sereno, and the street that my house is off of is the old Camino Real, right? Where the monks, the Spaniards would, and my neighborhood predates the founding of the city of LA. And the other day, my partner Kyle and I were driving, and I told him, like, isn't it odd that we live this close to a mission? Like, to these old buildings, like right next to, a Target. Like, it's just the weirdest thing. And the minute you sort of park and get out and go through those adobe walls, it's exactly what it was like. I mean, some parts of it are probably reconstructed, but for the most part, it's pretty much the way it's been. And there are these pockets and places in LA where you drive down one street and you're surrounded by trees and foliage and canyons, and it doesn't feel like you're in the middle of a city. So it has that way of like disrupting your sort of sense of place and location. Like,
right.
I get lost all the time. Like, I get totally lost when I'm, I have a bad sense of direction, but I get totally lost. And I love that about our city, is that I turn left and right, and then I'm in a location or a pocket that I never knew was there.
And you'll never find again, because
you'll never find again. It's like C.S. Lewis. Yeah, it's like the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? It's like you sort of step into this, like, and then suddenly you're like, wow, I never knew it. Like, I can't tell you how, I sound like a broken record. I can't tell you how many times I've come home and I've told Kyle, like, wow, I never knew that, X was there. Or I never knew that, this one street where you turn and you go up a street and you pass the this, and, you're in this little hill in this other neighborhood. Like, it's crazy, and I love it.
Well, that seems like a good way to close our chat here. And because you've just summed up Speculative LA and all the stories in it. And I think, what we were all trying to achieve in one way or another with our stories, just kind of trying to grasp at these ghostly straws and pull them into words and sentences.
And now you've both inspired me to write more. You and Denise and Amy and everybody at Akashic has inspired me now to maybe write more speculative science fiction. So who knows?
Who knows?
All righty. Well, thank you so much to Skylight for hosting us, and thank you to everyone who showed up. It's amazing here, virtual Skylight.
Yes. Thank you guys so much.
And thank you to the panelists.
Thank you, Denise.
Maddie.
Thank you all so much. This was really fun. And I now have a great list of places to visit when the pandemic is over, or maybe before. Some of these are outdoors, right?
Right.
When I first moved here, somebody told me Los Angeles is a city of 1,000 locked doors. And the longer you stay here, the more of them will open. Which I felt like is really fitting for thinking about LA as a speculative city. It really does feel like the way you guys are all talking, like there are all these beautiful secret places. And it's been a great reminder that we can go out and find these places. So thank you all for sharing those with me today.
Yay, thank you.
All right. Bye.
All right, everybody. Well, take care out there. Click that green button, and hopefully we'll catch you all on the flip side.
All right.
Bye
now.
Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Buy the book.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.